Hello and welcome back to this video. In this video, we are going to create a mini tax management project with our Tkinter. And without further ado, let's move forward. So the first thing we are going to do is to import Tkinter and also the TTK module. So I'm going to write import Tkinter as TK, and also from Tkinter. Okay, so we are going to configure our application or our window. So we are going to call it window, just like we did in our lesson. So I will just create a variable window and set it to tk dot capital letter tk, and I'll just close the class. So, and I'm going to add a little configuration to the window, and I'm going to say that window dot title is, I'm going to call it tax manager. Okay, and the next one, I'm going to give it a default height and width. So I'm going to say window dot geometry, and I'll pass my height and width. So I'm going to do 700 by 400 again, and I'm also going to make it non-resizable. So remember that the former window we created was resizable, so we could increase it, adjust the height and the width, but we want to make this window static so that we will not be able to increase or reduce it. So I'm sure we must have come across some user interface like that on our computer operating system. So we are going to set the window dot resizable to false. So we are just going to pass in false and false. So that is for the x and y value. Now, the next thing we are going to do is to start creating our widgets. So we are going to create a frame that is going to house the entire application. So, and I'm going to call that frame main, and I'm going to be using more of the TTK widgets. So I'm going to say TTK dot frame. So I'm going to place it on the window itself, and I'm going to give it a padding. So I can do that by adding a padding here and probably to 15 in pixel. So this is going to be like a full padding, padding X and padding Y. All right. So I'm going to pack the main now. All right. So the next thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a label for the entire frame. So I'm going to call it label, and I'm going to set it to ttk.label, and I'm going to place it on the main, and I'm going to add a text to it. So the text is going to be my text. So I'm going to end this here for now, and I'm going to pack it. I'm going to do label.pack, and in this pack parameter, I'm going to add it. I'm going to add the x and y padding. So I'm going to say padding, and I'll set it to default values for x and y. Right, so I have padding 0 on x and padding 15 on y. So the next thing I'm going to create is to create an entry field. All right, so we can run our main loop so that we can be viewing what we are creating as we are creating it. So I can create my main loop method and say windows.main loop, and I'll just close this and run so that we can check what we have created so far. So now we can see that this thing is not resizable, right? So there is no arrow for you to check whether it is resizable or not, and even this is deactivated. So now the next thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to create the entry widget. That is the place that you can type in the task that you want to save. So I am going to call it entry, and I'm going to set it to ttk.entry, and I'm going to pack it on the main and give it a custom font. So I'm going to set some font style to the text that will be passed in there, and here I'm going to enter in a string the font family. So I'm going to use the Calibri font, and I'm going to give it a font size of 12. So, and I'm going to pack it. So I will write entry dot pack, and I'm going to enter some parameters here. So, and I'm going to tell it to fill X. So I want it to span across the X axis, and the padding too, I'm going to add. So, and I'm going to say 0 on X axis and 10 on Y axis. Then I'm going to call this focus method on entry. So I'm going to say entry dot focus. And the reason for this focus is that when you click on the app, the first place that you're going to land is on the entry field. So when you just open the application, the keyboard will already be in the entry field and will be expecting you to type. So I'm going to save this and run. And now we have this. So now if I just click this, you see this keyboard is already there. And if I comment this out and run, you see I need to like click here before I can start typing it. Okay, so let's clear our terminal, and the next item that we are going to create is the place that we are going to have our list of taxes. So, and I'm going to call it list frame, and I'm going to set it to ttk.frame again, and we are going to pack it on the main, and we are going to pack it. So list frame dot pack, and in here we are going to pass a few parameters, and we are going to say that we want it to fill all sides. So we are going to say fill both, and we are going to set it to be able to expand. So expand is going to be true. Okay, so also when we were packing this main, we are going to set it to fill the both X and Y axis, right? And make it expandable too. So we are going to say fill both, and we are going to expand it, make it expandable by setting it to true. So if we save this and run now, we have this main place now filling the entire space. All right, so this main frame has now spanned across the entire UI. Okay, so, and I'm going to close this. Now I'll also create a scroll bar so that if I have a list of items that is beyond the height of my UI, then the list will now be scrollable. All right, so I'm going to add a scroll bar here. So I'm going to call it scroll, and I will set it to ttk dot scroll bar, and I'm going to place it on the list frame. All right, because it's the list items that I want to be scrolling. So, and I'm going to also pack this scroll. So scroll dot pack, and I'm also going to align it to the right side, and I want it to span across the entire Y axis. So I'm going to pass in some information here, and I'm going to say side equals, so I'll pass in right, and I'm going to say fill, and I'll pass in Y. Okay, so I may not run this again until I am done creating the entire UI. So the next thing I'm going to create is the list box. So I'll just call it list box, and I'm going to set it to tk.listbox. So ttk does not have this item, so I'm going to pass in list box here, and this is going to be housed inside the list frame, and it is all those boxes that contains the list. All right, so the next thing, so I'm going to pass in some parameters because we are styling this from here directly. So I'm going to pass it inside the list frame, and I'm going to give it a height of 10, and I'm also going to give it a background of black. So I'm going to pass in black, and I'm going to give it a foreground of white. So I can use FG, and I'll pass in white. So, and I'm going to give it a style called active style. So probably the one, a particular list that is selected at that is selected at that time. So, and I'm going to set it to none. So I'm going to set it to dot box, and I'll give it a scrolling behavior. So I'm going to say that, so I'm going to give it a y scroll command so that this, and we are going to pass this scroll here, right? And I'm going to pass in scroll dot set. Now also I'm going to give it, so I'm going to give it some font styling and some other styles. So I'm going to style the font, and I'll give it a font size, a font family of Calibri, and a font size of 12. And I'm going to give it another style called relief. So, and I'm just going to set it to flat. Okay, so as you can see, we have a lot of code on this line. So what I'm going to do is that I might make this to be vertically aligned, right? So, and so here I have this and this, so that we won't have our code spanning across, right? So, and I'm going to just leave this here, and this is how it's going to look like. Okay, so for now I'm going to now pack this list box. So I'm going to say list box dot pack, and I'm going to make it to fill both x and y axis. So I have both, and I want it to expand. So we have true. Then the next thing that we're going to do is to configure the scroll bar or the scroller a bit. So I'm going to call this scroll, and we are going to use the config. And the next thing that we are going to do is to give it a command. So now items like buttons and this scroll bar class or widget used to have a command, so that when you click them, something will happen, right? So we are simply saying that when the scroll bar is clicked, that this list view should be toggled and it should be moved across the y-axis. All right, so I am going to pass in the list box that we have here dot y view. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to be adding is the buttons that we are going to be working with. So I'm going to create a frame for it, and I'm going to say, call it button frame. So, and I'm going to set it to ttk dot button frame dot frame, and I'm going to pass in main. So, and I'm going to pack it. So button frame dot pack, and I'll pass in the paddy values. So I have paddy to be 15, and I want it to fill the x-axis. Okay, so let's look at what we have so far. So we just have this very basic place with this scroll bar that is not yet active, and we have a frame here for the button. So for now, the next thing I'm going to create is the command, is a function that is going to help us add or delete taxes. So I'm just going to define the function, and for the add, I'm going to call it add tax, and I'll open and close. So I'll set a parameter here called event, and I'm going to set it to none. All right, so but there will be an event, so the clicking of the button is the event, right? So I am going to say that tax is going to be our entry.get. So we are going to get content of this entry widget. So when somebody types in anything here, that will be the tax that we are getting. Okay, so we are going to make it entry.get, and so we are also probably going to strip the text, because of course the text is a string. So I'm going to say strip, and I will now check if there is a task passed in. So I will now say if task. So if there is a task, then it should be updated in the list box. All right, so I will now say that the list box, we will now insert it in the list box. So we have the insert method, and we want to insert it at the end of the list box. So if there is no other one at that time, it will just create one, but if there is one, it will just append it at the end. So and I will now append the task. So, and then I'll clear the entry widget. So I'm going to say entry dot delete. Okay, so, and I will make sure that there is nothing inside the entry widget from 0 to the end. So I will just delete everything in the entry widget. So by the time you add a tax, this is what is going to happen, right? So the next thing we can do is to delete a tax too. So I'm going to define the method and I'm going to call it delete tax. And here I will just use a try and except method. So I am going to just write try. So I'm just going to write my try statement, and I want to go to that list box and use the delete method. And what am I deleting? The list that the cursor is pointing on. So I'm going to say list box dot delete, and then I'm going to pass in what I want to delete. So I'm going to say list that what I want to delete is the item in the list box that the cursor has pointed or selected. So I'm just going to say cursor selection, and I'll close it. Then if there is nothing in the cursor, just pass. So I'll just write my except block and I will just say pass. Okay, so the next thing I will do is to create the buttons that these two functions will be using. So now I am going to create the first button. So I am going to say add button, and I'm going to set it to ttk dot button. So, and I'm going to place it on this button frame that we created. So I'm going to call the btn frame, and I'm going to save this. So, and I'm going to add the command that it will be using. So the command is this function. So every button is supposed to have a command, unless that button will be inactive. So what this command means is that whatever function that is passed here, then the command is going to be run when the button is clicked. So the click of the button calls the function. So I am just going to add command, and I'm going to call it add tags. All right, so, and I'm going to pack it. So, and I'm going to place it to the left. So I'm going to say side left, and I'm going to make it expand, and I want it to fill the x-axis. Okay, so I will also duplicate this button, all right, and just change it a little bit. So I'm going to add some padding to the button, and I'm going to say padding x. So, and I'm going to add 0 and 5. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is to create the second button. So I'll just duplicate this, but I'll just change the values. So here I am going to call it delete button, and the command is going to be delete tags. So, and I'm going to pack it. Okay, so, and I'm going to change the side to right, so that it will be floating on the right side. Okay, so, and for this padding I'm going to reverse this. So this padding is going to be 5 and 0. So, and I'm going to call the entry dot bind, so that each time the entry widget will be connected to this add function. All right, so I will now write this entry dot bind, and I'm going to pass in a string that says return, and then call the function that I want it to use. All right, so right now I am going to save this and run, so that we see what our UI currently looks like. And in our next video we are going to style our UI. So I am going to close this for the meantime, and I'm going to run this again. And now we have all of this. We have an input field, and we have a button here, and a button here. So we did not add a text for our button, so I'm just going to add a few texts and say that says add task, and this one is going to be delete task. So text is going to be task. Okay, so and I'll save and run again. So we are going to have a keyboard interaction error, but this will definitely work. So right now our UI is very functional. We can try this out, and if we add this, you see we have a text here and we can delete it from here. Right, so this is how our UI is currently. We can decide to add a little more styling to this, and then we are going to pass the styles on the widgets. So that is what we are going to be doing in our next video. So stay tuned as we style our UI.